Today, I'm delighted to be in Arts District of Los Angeles. The building that you're seeing behind me is one of my personal favorite buildings in all of Los Angeles. It is a Toy Factory Lofts, and the treat is in having a conversation with somebody who developed all of this part of town, or rather redeveloped it. So let's not waste any time. Let's get to touring this building with somebody who is qualified to do that the most. Yuval. All right, well, we're finally here, Yuval. Thanks for doing this.
It's my pleasure.
I appreciate that. So we're outside the building. How did this whole story get started?
We actually have to go back, about 26 years. We're starting to look very seriously at downtown Los Angeles. We saw the potential in downtown and kind of bringing it back. One of the lofts that he toured, the owner, his name was Paul Solomon, and Paul, about a year before, I was supposed to hire him for work. I said, yes, I'll hire you, but then he went and kind of started his own thing. Once this kind of connection started again, he called me and said, hey, I'd like to show you something. And he brought me down literally right here. The building was still a toy factory. He said, look, I'm in escrow on this building, but it's 250,000 square feet. I barely built anything in my life. I have no idea. I looked at it. We walked around. We took kind of a napkin, did some numbers, and said, yeah, it makes total sense to me. Go, I think you should do it. And then he said, well, would you consider partnering between me and the person that financed his first project, Len Hill? That's how we came about and created Linear City. And Len was playing golf with another investor of Paul. It was his dentist, actually. And anyway, so it's all kind of
Takes a village.
A weird networking kind of connection.
Yeah.
For me, that was the first time I met Len, and was a big movie producer. Beautiful house in Hancock Park. Not my typical crowd, but was a very nice person, and we had some really good chemistry. And we basically were the one that were going to buy this building. It was owned by Ace Novelty. It's a toy factory that was making stuffed animals. They had a license from Warner Brothers to make all the characters of Warner Brothers.
And this is the Buzz Lightyear aisle. Back in 1995, short-sighted retailers did not order enough dolls to meet demand.
There's windows all around the building, as you can see. And the back of the building used to be serviced with a railroad.
That's why it's curved the way it is.
That's why it's curved. The entire neighborhood basically was all railroads. Until a few years, there were still few signs here and there, and about 50% of the roads here, if you dig up the asphalt, you'll find a railroad below it.
When you were coming into this area to begin with, it looked nothing like it looks right now. It basically is an industrial area. You mentioned an arts district that's a little bit north of here, so artists kind of were living there already, but this area was still mostly industrial. What made you believe that it would work? What made you believe that people would move and actually have residences over here? Because the infrastructure was not there at the moment.
But the arts district, in reality, started really at the late 70s, early 80s, similar to trends that happened in Soho and Tribeca. Declining industrial areas, which provided, beautiful buildings like this, created the situation where beautiful spaces could be used for artists. The industry moved out of here. The ownership didn't know what to do with it. So you could, lease a 10,000 square foot warehouse for, $500. So for artists, it was heaven.
$5 million for a building like that, even in early 2000s, it does sound like a steal.
No, sounds like exactly what it was costing. It was on the market, it wasn't a steal. Just tells you what kind of inflation these projects created. But anyway, back to the artists. So the only challenge was that all this area was zoned for heavy industrial, M3 zone. If you wanted to develop, you would have to get basically the approval of the city to allow residents living here. But talking about the railroad easement, so these windows We're actually on the property line, and you can see the loading docks are right behind this truck. So the railroad would come along here, load and unload from the building. This was basically a railroad patch. It would go into different directions. So there was a 15-foot railroad land, and then privately owned land. And the railroad in 1978 sold all their properties. This guy bought it, and they did a lot-i. And that's created a non-conforming use of windows on the property line. So when I came to the city, I said, hey, I'd like to change the use to loft. They said, well, you can't, because you can't have an opening of the property line. It was a big crisis, and the city said, why won't you cut the building back 20 feet? I said, like, are you out of the mind? Anyway, so we were actually, it was a major crisis. The land was like exploding. It says, like, we just wasted $5 million. Well, like, we can't now convert the building. Eventually, there used to be a truck wash here, so we took the truck wash. We asked him if he's willing to sell us an air easement so nobody can build in the first 15 feet. And he said yes for $3 million.
Oh my God.
When I did this search, I realized that the history of the building, the history of this specific building, is before it was built, the entire area was owned actually by the railroad company. What they would do, they would parcelize the land, railroad spare, and then they would find a company that is willing to build a building to use the railroad, and that's how they basically develop business.
So they would like land lease it, basically?
No, they would actually give the land for free. It would be almost like a development agreement. Hey, Mr. So-and-so, you're gonna build 250,000 square feet of a warehouse. And
but you're gonna use us.
You're gonna use At the time, this is the only way to move goods, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
And this is a handwritten document, which is basically a development agreement that is on title. You can see it's public record. So I use the argument that the building was built in reliance existence of a railroad. So there's basically prescriptive rights that this must stay railroad use, and therefore I'm allowed to.
Who came up with this?
I did. So once we
Why am I not surprised?
So once we challenged him, and he says, you know, why should we fight?
Yeah.
We're willing to pay for it. And he says, okay, I get it. And we bought the air easement, we recorded it, and that's really how the project was able to proceed.
Wow.
So first we had to get through this basic thing that otherwise there's no project. We needed to figure out how to get a construction loan. By the way, Len, his idea was he would get some of his friends that invested in all his movies. We will put about 10 or 20% of the equity needed, and the partners would put the rest. Every friend that he brought down here looked at him and said, like, are you out of your mind? Who's gonna come here? There's no, like, leave us alone.
What is it that made you think that it's not crazy?
So at this point, I've been doing adaptive reuse projects up and down California between 97 and 2002. So 7 years.
Right.
I've been rehabbing old buildings. It wasn't even a question mark that if you take a beautiful building, convert it to residential, make a cool loft out of it, regardless of where you are, somebody's gonna rent it.
I understand the ambitious approach, but there were no cafes, no restaurants 26 years ago. They were very sparse over here, I would imagine.
Not only that, the other services, right? So this used to be a truck wash, which means they started at 6 a.m.
That's fun.
And if you would come at 5 a.m., you would see about 5 prostitutes standing here, 5 prostitutes standing there doing services to the truck drivers that were waiting. So that was the amenities of the neighborhood at the time. You know, I already finished the first project in the gas lamp building and was involved in the lofts that were developed right next to the Staples Center. So these are the first loft for sale condos. I realized there's a market. LA was a late arrival to the idea of loft living. I was surprised that nobody was really doing it on a larger scale. In the challenging area, none of his friends wanted to put money. We ended up having to come up with most of the capital ourselves. Len had to put a huge check to buy the building.
I know it's been a difficult part. I think in one of your interviews you mentioned that you guys went to like 40 banks or something.
Yeah. My office at the time was on the corner, and we would set up an appointment. You know, we started with the bigger banks. I would see a car kind of pulling up, kind of slows down.
Just keeps going.
Keeps going, and I get a call that says, oh, you know, I don't think this is our cup of tea. They were afraid to get out of the car.
Yeah.
And so like, at the end of the day, we found a bank, and they did another project in the Arts District, the Toy Warehouse Lofts, 5 years before. So we worked with them. I think at the time it was a $17 million construction loan. Oh, the other interesting part, while we were in escrow, the Toy Factory actually filed for bankruptcy.
Oh.
So it was owned by the Toy Factory, and they filed for bankruptcy for different reasons. What should have been 60 days escrow ended up, it took a whole year because we had to get the approvals of the court and so on. But we took the risk and continued with, you know, building plans and so on. And I first pulled out permit to do all the seismic work. So the moment we actually got the title, I was ready to start with the seismic work. It's a massive upgrade of the building. I mean, construction was going really fast. And at the end of the day, about 10 months into it, I kind of figured out, wow, would be great to start selling now.
10 months in.
10 months in, and so when we finish in construction, we have a few units to sell. At the time, we were still the poster boys of the city. Everybody was excited that we're bringing new life to the neighborhood.
Oh, I've seen it. I've monitored the newspapers of that time. So 10 months in, you decided to start pre-selling.
We go to the city and said, hey, would you let us open a sales office in the building? So of course the fire department says, no, the building doesn't have a certificate of occupancy, it's dangerous, we don't want to take the liability. You know, so we got some help from the mayor's office, met with the chief of the fire department. If you allow a fire inspector to come and escort the people from the sales office to the model unit, I'll let you do it in the weekends. We built the sales office. We just walked next to it, and I think it was unit 417. It's like where the O is on the 4th floor. I'm waiting at 10 o'clock in the morning. We had a massive mailing list, waiting list. And that is a story on its own because we created, you know, a website.
Right.
At the time, that was a new thing to create a website for...
and that's early 2000s.
Yeah.
That's 2003,
basically. So we're making this website, and we created a place where you can say, hey, I'm interested, add it to the mailing list.
Yeah.
You know, a couple months in, I get a call from my IT guy that says, like, you won't believe it, you have 5,000 people on your waiting list. It's like, how is that possible? Like, like we didn't advertise,
some
we
bots.
didn't do anything. And nobody knew what bots then. So
that's pre-bot time.
What happened is there was a guy that just came out to us and said, hey, give me $200 and I'll glue posters on any construction site in town. And like, you know, that's how they advertise concerts. So he used to do that and said, oh, I'll put your building. We said, sure. So we gave him $200. We gave him a bunch of posters. And he went and glued it on all the construction fencing around town.
That's $200 ever spent.
What happened was a paparazzi running with a video camera after a celebrity in Hollywood, and eventually he caught her, and the poster was right behind.
Yeah.
Overnight, people just like, what is this? They went online and put the name. So we started inviting people, basically 6 people for every hour. And we would take them with the inspector up to the unit, show them, and we kind of scheduled, you know, a Saturday and a Sunday. They go up with me was the fire chief himself that came.
Well, because it's a sweet gig.
He wanted to do the extra.
You get the overtime first and foremost. You get to hang out at a really cool building.
Anyway,
what's
so he
not
goes
to
up
like?
And he's listening me to explaining about the neighborhood and the future and so on. And after a few times, he says, oh, wow, I really like it. Is it okay if I explain? I said, sure, go ahead. He was like my marketing guy. Make a long story short, after 6 weekends, 85% of the building was under contract.
That's insane.
And when we when we've actually finished. So it took me 14 months to do the entire construction, and we started delivering. And the day we got our TCO, we closed all these escrows in one time. Money is getting wired to the bank. At 1 o'clock, the bank calls us and says, "Stop wiring money. You paid off your loan. We don't need any more money."
That's so fun.
It was really unreal.
Now, when you guys moved in, or when you guys started working on this project, what were your first memories of this area?
When you come to a place which is mostly industrial, a certain population that kind of hangs out here. So some vagrants, some homeless people, we mentioned prostitutes. However, I never felt unsafe here. Yes, there was a couple of times that somebody's car window was broken in, but typically you leave your computer on your seat and somebody basically sees it and takes it. But in fact, there was really very little crime that we felt. You know, so all these people are now coming, excited to live in the building, and they are super anxious about the security and their safety. Get bombarded with questions about safety and how safe it is. We did a resident meeting, and I invited the LAPD lead officer of the neighborhood. And everybody was like, "What should we do and how are we going to be safe?" And he was like just standing there smirking. And when everybody finished kind of whining, he said, "Okay, when you go home, I want you to go to the LAPD website and check what's the status of crime in this neighborhood. And you'll be shocked to find out that this is the safest neighborhood, not in the city of LA, in the county of LA."
You know, to their argument, there were also no people over here.
Exactly. So there's no reason to look at the past and be afraid. And then when we finished the building, there was a guard in the front. It was a secure building, camera system all around, people walking with dogs on the street day one. So every small encampment that we had on the street just naturally moved to another place because we were uncomfortable next to people. It was no longer abandoned. Let's talk about infrastructure and transportation. Technology changes, railroad became not kind of the mode of transferring goods, trucking came into place. So this is really the real change of this neighborhood, is that it wasn't designed for trucking. Everything that is now retail with this elevated sidewalk was loading dock. Trucks parked perpendicular, blocking the entire street. You basically would walk like this to get through, right? No traffic would get through. So the widths of the streets were never planned for trucks and trucking, loading and loading, and that's part of the reason why the industry left. As we come in as kind of the new residents and the new users, clearly the first solution is a private car. Bus transportation in LA is not so effective, so even though you have a bus stop here and you actually can catch a bus all the way to Santa Monica,
I would imagine that no one does it, really.
Very few people do it. However, the transportation revolution continues. We have a bike share system right in front of the building, so people are riding bikes. This is probably the first walkable neighborhood in LA. I maybe use my car once a week. I have a grocery store across the street. I have coffees, restaurants, museums. Everything is in a walking distance. For me, the real revolution is actually how you design this neighborhood, what type of people live here, how they conceive the place of work in relationship to where they live, and that's really what changes everything. Fun part for me about doing these adaptive reuse projects is how do you reinvent space in an existing building? It's built to the property line, so there's no side yards, there's no garden. So we took the lower roof and we turned it into a roof garden. We had to kind of reinforce the structural system to take all this weight. If you look on the top, there is this canopy. That's our swimming pool. And next to it, you see an olive tree. That's actually my garden. Inside the building, we were able to create basically open space, green space, people can relax. So despite what appears to be a harsh environment, it's actually a pretty luxurious quality of life.
What are your favorite spots here in the neighborhood? What's the best coffee? I mean, most important question, I guess.
Great question. And you have amazing options of the amount of coffee that we can drink here. Anyway, we have like 10 coffee shops. We're probably per capita, we are the highest level of caffeine. At one point of time, we had 5 distilleries. in the neighborhood. People were making
It's
vodka
difficult to
and gin
stay
and so
to
on
stay
and so on.
sober in this environment.
And there's kind of cycles of, I would say, what is fashionable, things going fashion, going out of fashion. When we just started, we had 5 of the most amazing jeans label.
How did that happen? Because as the story goes, and that's what I read in the archival articles of the newspapers, LA Times wrote about it, wrote about this phenomena, where in early 2010, there were 5 or 6, one of the biggest denim brands in the world located just right here.
I would say it's a combination of coincidence. Fashion companies are somewhere between the arts, design, and production. So they want to be in the environment where the production is close. They want to have the designers be in a place that they feel is cool and interesting and so on. My next door neighbor that bought a unit for me, her name was Luciana Brancursini. And she was in the fashion business, and she was an importer from Italy, and she had a place in the fashion center in downtown. One day she calls me and he says, "Oh, can you come up to the pool? There's somebody here that is looking for a space. Maybe you can rent him a space." Adriano Goldschmidt is standing there and says, "I don't know where to put my equipment. I need a place for a couple weeks. Can you help me?" I said, "Sure." So I walked downstairs, I opened one of the spaces. I said, "Is this good enough?" He said, "This is amazing." I said, "Okay, take it for a few weeks, I don't care." The next morning I show up, there's like a whole truck unloading equipment, sewing machines. I said, like, "This is for 2 weeks." They're like, "What's happening?" I said, no, I love this space." I said, like, "You didn't sign a lease, there's nothing." I said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." I said, "Okay." He comes to my office, he signs a lease, he takes 2 spaces. 2 months later, he says, "I'm running out of space. I need 3 more spaces."
3 more.
So he went from 4,000 to 10,000 in a matter of, and I said, like, "Just tell me what you're doing. I have no, like, what is it?" And he said, "Look, I started Diesel. Back in the day, I'm a big jeans designer. I have a new brand that I'm starting." He was very successful, built a whole new brand right here. Now, people started coming to see what he's doing and so on. And then I got this other brand and another brand and another brand, and suddenly out of the blue, this became like a jeans mecca overnight.
Why is it important for you? Why was it important for your partners to document the history of this building?
I love history. A plain curiosity of understanding what was here before, how did this neighborhood came about. The other part of it is I believe that the people that move in here want to understand the history as well. In other words, when you buy a loft in a building that was built in 1924, you want to understand what you're buying. And selling a story in the early stages where the rest of it didn't look so brilliant is actually kind of a way to give it a nice color. You know, one story that was talking about the first lender, I remember this conversation. We went up to the roof. This lady that did the underwriting says, "Okay, Yuval, explain us why would anybody come and live here?" And I said, "You see the skyline of downtown? This is 10 minutes from here. There's 500,000 jobs of people that have to every day get in the car, drive all the way to downtown to work. Comes 5 o'clock, they have to drive home. Average commute over an hour." So I told this lady, I said, "Look, all I need is 120 smart people that want to cut the commute from an hour to 10 minutes. How hard is it?" And says, "You know what? I buy it." So I sold him the story that turned out to be bullshit. I built the building, I sold the unit. Half a year later, I did a survey. Where does everybody work? Out of
And what did you find out?
150 people, only 2 people were working downtown. They were all architects, designers, fashion designers, interior designers, photographers. They came here because the space allowed them to do what they do in their life in the most convenient way without me over-designing the space. Like, they got 4 white walls, concrete floor, concrete ceiling, nice kitchen, nice bathroom, and that's it. We didn't try to over-design it. We made it pretty utilitarian and allowed everybody to design it the way it is, and some amazing creation that came out of the interior designs. My unit was in an interior magazine, quite a few others and so on. So allowing people to kind of express themselves and give the space without kind of overdoing it seemed to be at the time a very good strategy. It's really the fact that developers today, even today, with all this new knowledge, when you look at all the new construction buildings, you know what's the average size of a unit?
Like 1,200 square feet?
650, average.
650.
The trend always been to make it
Shrink it down.
small because it seems like you're getting a higher rent per square foot.
Yeah.
So you're kind of fitting it on an affordability level. But the units are so small that other than sleeping in a unit, this is it. That means you have to work somewhere else, you have to entertain somewhere else. I have events in my loft on a regular basis with 60 people. No problem. Yeah, I have a 1,700 square feet loft. It's not a massive house, and it works perfect for work, for entertainment, for living, and so on. And
Yeah.
nobody built this stuff, so that means all these existing buildings is basically a static inventory, and that's what makes them so valuable. They'll never lose value because there's basically a finite number of this type of units available in the marketplace.
You just mentioned values, so I guess it's a good way to look into the value, because obviously the interesting thing to me is the fact that, you know, it was sold for $5 million. Just a couple of years ago, one of the units sold for over $3 million. So it's, you know, just 25 years later, you know, one unit sold for, you know, 60% of the value of the whole building. But obviously, they don't fluctuate as much as some other properties. But they don't really go down because there's not much more of this product being added to the market. It's one of the most stable investments in this sense.
You are absolutely right. There's a finite amount of product that has these characteristics, and nobody is building something like this today, so it will never lose its value. Also, these are solid buildings. They were built as industrial building, right? The floor was designed for trucks to drive on.
Yeah.
In Second World War, this was actually a designated bomb shelter, right? So it's like indestructible. Back in 2004, it was $325. Today, it's around $800 a unit. It's certainly appreciated, mostly because the neighborhood developed, and it's now, you know, you don't need to be a pioneer to live here. It's a pretty normal place for people that have this type of sensibility.
The building is very industrial looking. Have you ever thought about sort of softening it up, or the decision was made right away to sort of play out this rough edge, this industrial side of it?
I would say there was always a consensus that roughness of the concrete building, although if you look carefully, there is actually architectural detail. Like you see this column going up, there's a corbel at the top, there's a small detail there. So it's kind of a very rudimentary, but
it's there.
We enjoyed it, right? So you look at the chipping of the concrete, we celebrate these things. We're not trying to hide it, fix it, look it. All these things are kind of part of the original fabric. As I mentioned, these were the loading docks, right? So the edge of the loading dock was here, and it was 4 feet above grade. So it's like, how do I make use of it?
Yeah.
So I had to fight with the city. This is actually public property to allow me to build this elevated sidewalk.
That must have been a fun experience, fighting with them.
So like, this is not a standard detail, right? We can't do it. And eventually I invited Gary Lee Moore, the city engineer. I said, like, why don't you just walk with me? And he got it, and he said, fine, do it. And we set up actually a new standard for the city, and now the lofts on Hewitt were able to build the same thing. And now from a loading dock where you would have to go from inside the building to the space, we could turn it into retail. There's a fashion agency, my office, and these uses change all the time.
Change the street from two-way street to one-way street, is that right?
We did. We had a challenge where all the trucks were coming all the time through. So I said, if I'll change it in a one-way street, I changed it actually to go this direction. And then I realized that the truckers didn't care. They kept going through here and it was very noisy. So actually on my own, moved the no entry sign from one side to the other side. And for like 5 years, Google Maps didn't catch out of it, and people would keep driving against the traffic, but eventually it kind of fixed itself.
One of the most prominent features of the building is toy sign on a side of it. Was that here originally? Was that sort of a branding idea? How did that come about?
Clive Wilkinson was our architect. So we had a kind of a executive architect and a design architect, and we actually moved through probably 3 different architects because the 3 partners had a different vision and taste, and everyone was kind of pulling to his direction. But ended up with Clive, excellent architect, and his team came up with this super graphic, which was quite a challenge to actually paint. So we had to create a grid on the entire building, impose it, and then with a swing stage go up and down and paint the entire thing.
I know some of the industrial buildings and commercial buildings had to be reinforced, but probably not the case over here because
no, this had...
you guys had enough concrete as it was.
We did have to do a big structural upgrade.
Really?
Yeah, so although it's very solid concrete, it's a non-ductile concrete. So at the time, there was no earthquake code. So to give it its lateral strength, we had to do a seismic upgrade.
But even with that, I mean, the building withstood Long Beach earthquake.
You could see actually the cracks in the exterior walls of all the old earthquakes. Right? You could see the stress. The building does move. This pool has a kind of its own interesting story. I'm going to point you to this plaque here, the fish pond, in honor of Greg Fisher. Really, what happened? The building as is was not a high-rise because the upper floor was below 75 feet, so it wasn't considered a high-rise.
Right.
And we suggested basically adding this pool area, and the fire department says, oh, now this is going to be considered an occupied floor, therefore the entire building should be a high-rise, which is a huge expanse. And it's like, this is ridiculous. It's not making the place more dangerous from a fire perspective. Right. And they said, well, no, the code is a code. At the time, we were doing these tours with different developers that were doing projects in downtown.
Yeah.
And one of these tours, we met Greg. He was a deputy mayor of one of the council members, CD9, also an amateur historian, and we were talking about it, and says, oh, this is ridiculous, so they're making you do this, and so on. So, well, help us. So he arranged a meeting with the fire department, and we walked in, and we basically negotiated a deal that made the building half a high-rise. In other words, some requirements we had to comply with, some requirements they just said, like, don't worry about it.
LA is not just about buildings that were constructed 5 years ago, but about this architectural legacy, about this industrial legacy. Do you think this building is going to go down as your legacy?
It's really not up to me to decide. I did affect a lot of people's life. I would say everybody that bought units here kind of day one, in one way or another, I was probably the most important event in their lives. In other words, they bought something $400,000 that now is worth $900,000, and now their lives is kind of in place and stable. There's been a lot of beautiful businesses that started here, families that started here. So that's a rewarding part of impacting people's life. In most cases, developers don't get to enjoy it. I just happen to decide to live here, so I actually see the impact of real estate development after the fact.
What an amazing experience that was. It's always been my intention to partner up with people that actually way more qualified than me to talk about the architecture, the history, the redevelopment project, and it is an absolute score to have Yuval Bar-Zemer, a developer of this property, talk about moments as it pertained to not only redeveloping one building, which is Toy Factory Lofts, and this whole neighborhood. Certainly wanted to say thank you to Yuval, because he didn't have to do it, but he graciously agreed to. I'm not regretting it at all. I think that was a fantastic luck on my part to have a conversation with somebody like him. If you are the one that lives in a building like that, or maybe in an amazing loft unit, please reach out to me. Maybe you'll become the next hero of my channel. Thank you guys for supporting me on this journey, because it is a passion project, but I do believe that I share this passion with a lot of like-minded people, and that's what keeps me going. So thank you for doing this, and I'll see you guys at the next episode on my channel very, very soon.